Did you see it? Let's watch it again. Did you see it that time? If you saw it that time, you have better eyes than I do. Let's watch it in slow motion. Oh, there it was. Holy cow, that was really quick. This video is slowed down to 1/5 normal time, 1/5 of real time, and I can still just barely see that jersey tug. But that is the holding penalty with which the referees effectively decided to end Super Bowl 57, giving the Kansas City Chiefs a win. Let's talk about it. The first important thing to clarify is that what millions of people are reacting to is what they saw on TV, which was not the holding call.
Case scenario, you'll see James Bradbury, they're going to say he grabs him. He's got his left hand on his back. I don't know.
So the national broadcast that everybody watched was saying that there was the penalty. So people, including myself, were very unhappy because pretty much nobody believed that they saw a penalty. And they're correct. They didn't. Even LeBron James, who was at the game, tweeted out a reference to his hand on his back. But look again. That's defender James Bradbury's left hand. In a statement after the game, the referees noted that the defender grabbed the jersey with his right hand. They're talking about this moment, the jersey tug, which was never shown during the national replays from that angle. Is that a penalty? Well, from the precise wording of the NFL's very own rulebook published on its website, the defender may not grasp an eligible player or his jersey. So absolutely no question, that's a penalty. End of story, case closed. Class dismissed, video over, roll the credits.
On now! That is basically how you're gonna end the Super Bowl? If someone tugged my shirt like that in the grocery store, I wouldn't even feel it! There's no way that pass is catchable even if he doesn't. The defender is allowed to make contact within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. He hadn't even gotten past the line of scrimmage!
Okay, and we're taking deep breaths. We're calm. We are remembering our mantra. We are relaxing. Okay, so let's try to break this down and sort it out. So pass interference can only be called when the action significantly hinders an eligible player's opportunity to catch the ball. But this was not pass interference, this was holding. But even in their post-game rationalization for the call, the referees referenced that the holding restricted him from releasing to the outside. So therefore, we called defensive holding. Therefore. So it sounds like they are not that concerned with the fact of the pulling of the jersey. They called the penalty because receiver Juju Smith-Schuster was restricted from running his route. Really? He was restricted? This tiny tug held him back? Watch again at regular speed and tell me if it looks like a receiver is in any way restricted or held back even for a split second. It looks to me like Juju Smith-Schuster is in the process of redirecting himself when the tug happens. Look at the way his body is positioned when Bradbury releases his grip. It's almost precisely at the moment that he's done planting and redirecting himself and begins to try to move upfield and separate himself from Bradbury. It's really difficult to comprehend how there was any restriction when it happened while he was planted and redirecting himself. And remember that it's not only legal but standard defending to put your hands on the receiver within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And plenty of things that look an awful lot like holding and definitely seem to impede the receiver's route are not only legal, they are even things that defenders are instructed to do and are considered good defending.
Jalen Ramsey has a really good stance right here against DeAndre Hopkins. He doesn't allow him to get past him.
The main attempt from the jam is to go the timing off and get the wide receiver off his line. So if you can jam him up, ride him out inside, ride him out outside, it's going to make your job a lot easier.
A lot of those actions seem way more restrictive than what Bradbury does here. But the key thing seems to be that they're all open-palmed. They're not actually holding on to the receiver. But again, isn't this all moot? The rule book says nothing about whether or not the receiver's route is restricted. It simply says if you grasp a player or his jersey, it's a holding penalty, end of story. So why in the post-game statement did the referees not just say you can't tug the jersey, that's a penalty, end of story? Why did they mention restricting the receiver's release as if that was the reason they called the penalty? To me, the statement reads as a tacit acknowledgement that that kind of hold happens often in games but is not always called. Because if that kind of penalty is always called, then why would you need to justify it with the restricted route rationalization? James Bradberry himself even acknowledged after the game that he held the jersey but was hoping the refs would let it go.
I mean, I pulled the jersey, they called holding. I was hoping they would let it ride, but it wasn't holding. I was hoping he would let it go.
If it's standard practice for that kind of play to happen in a game but not always be called a penalty, then unfortunately we're back in difficult subjective territory asking whether or not it should have been called a penalty. Do you think it should have been called a penalty? Please allow me some time for a number of final thoughts here. First, the clickbaity discourse around this is going to ask, did the Eagles lose the Super Bowl because of this penalty? No, the Eagles most definitely did not lose the Super Bowl because of the penalty, and hopefully nobody on those clickbait shows is actually arguing that they did. The Eagles lost a fumble that the Chiefs smoothly recovered and returned 35 yards for a touchdown. And twice in the fourth quarter, the Chiefs managed to get a man wide open in the red zone for a touchdown. And one of those touchdowns came after the Eagles surrendered a 60-plus yard punt return all the way to within the 10-yard line. Those are the reasons the Eagles lost the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs are deserving Super Bowl champions, and no one should take that away from them. The only thing the Eagles lost because of the penalty was one more chance. If the holding penalty is not called, it's a safe assumption that the Chiefs attempt a field goal of about 35 yards on the next play. And even though he missed a longer field goal earlier in the game, it's a fairly safe assumption that Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker makes the field goal. Now, it's not certain that he would have. It would be nice to have seen that actually have to play out. While the odds were highly against it, there is still a distant possibility the Eagles get the ball back with a tie game. But even assuming a successful Chiefs field goal, that still would have given the Eagles the ball back with a minute and a half, most likely starting their drive at their own 25-yard line or thereabouts. Now, however great a team the Eagles are, the odds would not have been in their favor in that situation. Given that situation, it is absurd to assume that the Eagles march down the field and tie the game or take the lead. And since it's absurd to assume either of those outcomes, it is absurd to assume that the Eagles were robbed of a Super Bowl win. But they definitely would have had a chance. The Buffalo Bills faced a strikingly similar situation against the Chiefs in the divisional round last season, except the Bills had even less time on the clock than the Eagles would have. But what wound up happening for the rest of that game was so dramatic that it was almost immediately considered one of the best playoff games ever played. And that was only the divisional round, the quarterfinals. This was the Super Bowl. This was the final round. That one last chance was taken away from the Eagles, and the possibility of an already great game escalating to possibly one of the greatest football games of all time was taken away from all of us. Look, I need to try to stay humble here and admit that I only played one season of football ever in my entire life, and it was in 8th grade. I don't want to pretend to be enough of an expert about football to say with authority that that penalty should not have been called. But I do wish to say, simply as a fan of football who did not have a rooting interest in either team, I really wish that penalty had not been called. I saw a pass that was not catchable. That tug was so subtle that I don't see how it could have possibly obstructed the receiver's route at all. And even if there was subtle restriction, I don't see how it could have possibly been the thing that stopped him from getting to that ball. That little tug just seems so inconsequential to the outcome of the play. If it really just has to be called a penalty based on the rules, then I wish they would change the rules. Pass interference penalties, for example, have it written right there in the rule book that all actions that would be pass interference are still not to be called a penalty if the pass is uncatchable. Maybe a similar rule could be written as an exemption for holding penalties. But maybe we don't even need a rule change. If it really is standard that those kinds of little tugs happen often and often are overlooked by the refs, then I simply wish the ref had looked the other way this time. But if they actually do normally call little tugs like that are inconsequential to the outcome of the play, then I wish they would change the rules so they wouldn't have to do that. I don't know, man. I don't know. I just really wish they hadn't thrown that flag.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.